The first thing I felt was the cold sharp. Artificial. The kind that makes you wonder if the room is freezing or if it's just you. I stood in that courtroom wearing my dusty work jacket, boots still caked with concrete, while my parents Brenda and Walter sat across from me, looking like they were attending a billionaire's funeral. Their lawyer's voice dripped with confidence as he told the judge I had manipulated a dying old man for personal gain. But when he claimed I trapped my grandfather Leonard in a dangerous workshop to speed up his death, something inside me didn't break. It awakened. And the terrifying part, they knew exactly what they were doing. I didn't grow up thinking I'd ever end up in a courtroom fighting the people whose last name I carry. If anything, I spent most of my life trying to earn a place in a family that never really saw me. I was adopted at 6 years old enough to remember what came before, young enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd landed somewhere I could finally belong. Brenda and Walter made sure the world knew how charitable they were, how noble, how generous for saving a child who wasn't theirs by blood. They'd say things like we gave him a real life, always with the tone of someone expecting applause. But I learned quickly that in the Miller household, there were two classes of family, those displayed like trophies, and those kept quiet in the background. I was the latter. Things shifted permanently when their biological daughter, Michelle, was born, their miracle baby, as Brenda liked to call her, as if my existence had only been a warm-up act. From the moment Michelle arrived, every photograph, every conversation, every decision revolved around her. She sparkled in their curated world of garden parties, charity galas, modeling for children's catalogs, and eventually, building a teen influencer persona polished enough to reflect well on her parents' image. Meanwhile, I became the household's utility, not quite a son, not quite a guest just there to fill in the gaps. If Walter needed an extra pair of hands for home repairs, I was summoned. If Brenda needed something delivered or picked up, I was the automatic choice. I didn't resent it then. I just assumed that working hard was the way you showed love. I didn't understand that in healthy families, love is something given, not traded. My real education started when I met my grandfather Leonard, Walter's father. He wasn't a grandparent in the traditional sense. He carried a quiet, stubborn warmth that didn't need to be performed. He smelled faintly of sawdust and tobacco, the kind that clung to his shirts even after they'd been washed. He ran a small woodworking shop on the edge of town, nothing glamorous, nothing prestigious, just a place where things were made with patience and hands. The first time Walter dropped me off there, I thought I'd do odd chores or run errands. Instead, Leonard handed me a pair of safety goggles and said, "Every kid needs to learn how to build something." That was the beginning of a bond no one else in the family ever understood. He taught me how to sand a piece of oak until it gleamed, how to read the grain of a board, how to sharpen tools until they sliced clean. But more than that, he taught me how to be still, how to pay attention to the things people don't say. He never treated me like a charity project. He treated me like someone worth knowing. When Leonard's memory first began to fray at the edges, I noticed before anyone else. It was subtle at first, forgetting where he set his glasses, repeating the same story twice in one afternoon. I mentioned it gently to Walter, who waved it off with a laugh. "He's old, Brian. That's what old people do." Brenda chimed in with, "Let's not dramatize things," as though concern itself was an inconvenience to her schedule. But I kept seeing it, the hesitation in Leonard's eyes when he tried to find the right word, the confusion when familiar tasks slipped out of reach. Eventually, the cracks widened enough for Brenda and Walter to notice. But their solution was immediate and simple: a facility. "It's what's best for him," they insisted, repeating it like a slogan. "He needs professional care." What they meant was, he's becoming a burden. And burdens are handled quietly. The place they chose looked impressive on brochures, clean, glossy, full of smiling caregivers, but the reality was a building meant for storage, not living. Leonard, who once spent hours shaping delicate pieces of walnut into furniture legs, was now stuck in a beige room with a TV remote he didn't know how to use. His workshop stood empty, the tools gathering dust, the air stagnant without the hum of his hands at work. I visited him every day. I brought him his favorite sandwiches, old woodworking magazines, small pieces of unfinished projects to sand. When he forgot words, I filled them in without correcting him. When he repeated stories, I laughed again like they were new. I learned to read the tension in his shoulders when he felt trapped in his own mind. He always relaxed when I walked in, as if my presence let him exhale. Brenda and Walter rarely visited. They'd stop by only when a holiday photo was needed or when the facility director hinted that their absence was becoming noticeable. Michelle never visited. She claimed the place creeped her out and said dementia made her uncomfortable. Whenever I asked about it, Brenda would sigh dramatically. Michelle's very sensitive. Please don't guilt her. So the responsibility fell to me, not because I'd been appointed, but because I cared. I started handling Leonard's medications, driving him to appointments, advocating for small improvements in his care. The staff liked me. They said I was the only family member they ever saw. They weren't wrong. But things got worse when Leonard's decline accelerated. He began forgetting to eat, forgetting how to dress himself. He cried sometimes without understanding why. One day, during a visit, he clutched my wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "Take me home." It wasn't a question. It was a plea. I brought it up that evening over dinner. Walter stared at his phone while Brenda arranged the silverware just so. "He needs you," I said quietly. "He's lonely. He's scared. He wants to be in his own space." Brenda set her fork down with exaggerated patience. "Brian, we all want things. That doesn't mean they're practical," Walter added. "We're very busy. And that workshop is dangerous in his condition. Your bleeding heart isn't going to change that." That was the moment I understood the family hierarchy perfectly: appearances first, comfort second, people last. So I moved Leonard out myself. I renovated his workshop into a small living space, warm, safe, accessible. I installed railings, refurbished his old recliner, stocked the place with soft blankets and his favorite snacks. The first night he slept there, he smiled. A small smile, but a real one. That workshop became his sanctuary. And in caring for him, something strange happened. I became more myself, more grounded, more certain of what mattered. I wasn't the invisible son anymore. I was just a man doing right by the one person who had always seen me. But Brenda and Walter didn't understand devotion that didn't come with cameras or praise. They saw only inconvenience. And as the years passed, their resentment grew quietly. Like mold in the corners of a house, no one bothers to clean. They didn't know it then. But the story they were trying to bury was already taking root. It would just take the right moment for everything to break open. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a draft through an old window, just enough to make you uncomfortable before you realize the whole house is cold. At first, Brenda and Walter pretended to be supportive of me caring for Leonard, mostly because it allowed them to avoid any real responsibility. Whenever someone at a social event called them such devoted family, they would smile graciously and say, "Brian helps out a lot," as if I were some neighborhood kid they paid $20 to mow the lawn. But the more Leonard depended on me, the more my parents subtly increased their expectations. It started with requests, masked as gratitude. "We appreciate you being there," Brenda would say. "So could you add Wednesdays to your routine? We have an event?" Or Walter would text, "Heading out of town, check on Dad's prescriptions, you're closer anyway." The asks evolved into assumptions. Before long, I wasn't just caring for Leonard, I was maintaining their house, fixing Michelle's car, picking up dry cleaning, patching leaky pipes, and handling half of the family obligations that didn't photograph well enough for Brenda to bother with. Anytime I hesitated, Brenda would give me that disappointed look, the one she'd mastered long ago. "Brian, family helps family. Don't be selfish." It was ironic, but also effective. Years of conditioning made me default to guilt before logic. Then came the financial part. The real estate crash hit Walter harder than he let on. He talked big at dinners, bragging about diversifying his portfolio. But the truth leaked through in other ways: late-night arguments behind closed doors, hushed phone calls, a tension in his shoulders that even a tailored suit couldn't hide. So, naturally, they turned to me. At first, it was subtle. Could you cover the electric bill until next week? Or we'll pay you back when the bonus hits. The bonus never hit. The payback never came. I didn't mind helping in small ways. But it grew like everything else with them. Suddenly, I was temporarily footing the bill for the property's landscaping supplies, the maintenance materials for Leonard's old workshop, even some of the facility fees left over from before I brought him home. At one point, I realized I was spending nearly a third of my income patching the holes in their lifestyle, while they continued hosting wine tastings and networking brunches. And then there was Michelle. Her influencer career took off in a way none of us expected. She rose quickly. But maintaining the illusion of effortless luxury required funding. Lots of it. And once again, the quiet solution was me. Could you just help her with her outdoor sets for a brand shoot? What she meant was build me a miniature garden installation with custom benches, lighting, and a portable koi feature by tomorrow. I did it. Every time. I told myself it was family. I told myself she was young and overwhelmed. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid that stopping just once would prove what they had always implied. That I wasn't grateful. That I was difficult. That I didn't belong. By the time Leonard's condition reached its hardest stage, I was stretched thin in every direction. He was losing mobility and memory faster. Some mornings he didn't recognize himself in the mirror. Some nights he woke up terrified, asking for his mother, or asking if he'd done something wrong. I held him through all of it. I never resented him. But I began to resent the silence from the rest of the family. The breaking point in the tightening came slowly but unmistakably. It began when a social worker visited to update Leonard's medical paperwork. She asked who his primary caregiver was. I said, "Me." Brenda overheard. She pulled me aside instantly. Smile frozen. Voice tight. "Brian, don't tell people that. It makes us look absent." Then came the subtle warning signs. Brenda and Walter suddenly became interested in legal documents, wills, power of attorney, estate planning. Not in a responsible way, but in the way people look at an aging relative and start seeing dollar signs. They began stopping by unannounced, acting overly affectionate, bringing Leonard gifts they'd never noticed he liked. They posted photos online with captions like "Cherish the moments," conveniently cropping me out. Michelle filmed a vlog in the workshop one afternoon, pretending she had arranged everything for Leonard. She didn't even acknowledge me standing 3 feet away holding the food tray. But the worst sign came the day I overheard Brenda whispering to Walter in the hallway. "He trusts Brian too much. We need to get ahead of this." That wasn't concern. That was strategy. The pressure reached a suffocating point the night Leonard had a severe episode. He had forgotten where he was and tried to leave the workshop. Panicked, disoriented, I stopped him gently, guided him back inside, and sat with him until he calmed down. He eventually fell asleep holding my sleeve. At Doi, exhausted. I texted Brenda and Walter. He had a rough night. Maybe come by tomorrow. No reply. They didn't show up the next day, or the day after. But Michelle posted a story, "Family First." I watched it while cleaning dried soup from Leonard's blanket and realized something sharp and undeniable. I was the only one holding everything together. And they were counting on that fact. The more I carried, the more they demanded. The more they demanded, the less they showed up. And the less they showed up, the more they resented that Leonard turned to me instead of them. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. And the moment I understood that, something inside me tightened. Too, a quiet, growing tension that would eventually snap. But not yet. Not quite. The storm was coming. And we were all already standing in the wind. We just didn't know how hard it would hit. The night everything snapped didn't arrive with drama, it arrived with quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel sharper, heavier. Leonard had been having more bad days than good ones. And I had been running on fumes for weeks. My hands were permanently dry from washing. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. And every muscle in my back felt pulled tight as wire. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, One of the rare days I had asked Brenda and Walter to help. I'd sent them a message that morning. Could you come by for an hour? He keeps asking for you. They didn't answer, but they showed up anyway. Just not for Leonard. I heard Michelle's voice first, bright. Performative. Rehearsed. Lighting's perfect here. Okay. Dad. Stand next to Grandpa's tools. Mom. Lean in like you're helping. I froze in the doorway. Brenda and Walter were posing in the workshop, smiling warmly for Michelle's camera, while Leonard sat in his recliner, confused, clutching the blanket I had wrapped around him an hour earlier. The blanket he always held when he was frightened. Michelle was filming a tribute clip. She spoke to the camera about cherishing time with loved ones, about being present, about 3 generations under one roof. She said all this while Leonard looked at her with no recognition at all. I stepped inside. What are you doing? Walter didn't turn. Just getting some family content. Don't ruin the moment. Brenda waved a dismissive hand. Brian, stop being dramatic. This is good for all of us. People love heartfelt posts. Michelle shushed me. Please. You're killing the vibe. I looked at Leonard. His eyes were watering. He whispered, barely audible, Brian, take me home. He was already home, but he didn't feel it not with them there. Rearranging his life into a backdrop. Something inside me fractured cleanly, like wood splintering under too much pressure. Not anger, not rage, just a realization so clear it felt icy. They weren't confused. They weren't overwhelmed. They weren't even pretending anymore. They were using him, and they assumed I would quietly hold the weight of the truth. Walter walked over to Leonard and lifted his phone. Dad. To smile. Let's make this quick. Leonard flinched. That was it. The moment. The break didn't feel explosive, it felt silent. A cold click inside my chest. Everyone out, I said. Brenda laughed. Excuse me? Out. Now. You don't get to use him as a prop. Michelle scoffed. Wow. Are you having a mental breakdown? Because this looks like a breakdown? I walked to the door and opened it. Leave. Walter's expression hardened. You don't get to dictate anything in this family. And that was the final piece falling into place. I wasn't part of their family. Not really. Not in the way that mattered to them. I met Leonard's eyes, even through the fog of memory loss. He looked relieved when the door closed behind them. I sat beside him and took his hand. I'm here. I whispered. He nodded. Half asleep already. For the first time in my life. I didn't feel guilty for setting a boundary. I felt steady, centered, certain. That night, after he fell asleep, I cleaned the workshop. I threw away the props they had brought. I reorganized the space until it felt peaceful again. Then I sat alone in the quiet and realized something simple, devastating, and liberating. They hadn't made a mistake. They had crossed a line intentionally. And I was done pretending it didn't hurt. Done carrying the weight for all of them. Done being invisible. The breaking point wasn't loud. It was the moment I finally understood I didn't need permission to walk away. The morning after the break, the world felt strangely still, like a storm had passed. But the clouds hadn't realized it yet. I woke early, made coffee, and sat beside Leonard as he slept in his recliner. His breathing was uneven, but peaceful. The kind of peace that only came when the house was quiet, when no one was performing for a camera. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about strategy. I was thinking about survival, his and mine. But the shift had already begun. It started with paperwork. A social worker visited to reassess Leonard's care plan. She reviewed the documents, nodded thoughtfully, and then asked who handled his financial responsibilities. I hesitated, expecting to say Walter's name out of habit, but she pointed at one line on the form. Brian Miller, primary representative. That's you, right? I blinked. Yes. She continued as if it were obvious. He granted you durable power of attorney 3 years ago. Didn't anyone explain that to you? 3 years ago. Around the time Brenda and Walter were too busy to help. Around the time Michelle was filming makeup tutorials for her first sponsorships. Around the time Leonard began confusing days of the week, he had made the decision quietly, without fanfare, without asking permission from anyone. He had chosen me. It was the first tectonic shift. When the social worker left, I dug through Leonard's old filing cabinet. I found the notarized document, crisp and official, but that wasn't all. I found insurance papers, account statements, the deed to the workshop property, and all of them listed me as the executor, beneficiary, or alternate decision maker. He had rearranged his life around the person who actually cared for him, not the ones who photographed caring. I sat there for a long time, absorbing the weight of what he had entrusted to me. For the first time, I wasn't powerless. I was responsible. And the more I looked, the more I realized Brenda and Walter had assumed everything was still under their control simply because they believed it belonged to them by default. They never asked questions. They never checked documents. They just assumed biology equaled ownership. They were wrong. The second shift came when I opened my email. There were dozens of messages from companies I managed landscaping contracts for, including Brenda and Walter's property. Years ago, when they'd convinced me to bundle their account with my business billing so they could handle payments later. I opened the spreadsheet I'd been updating without much thought over the years. I froze. They owed me more than I had earned in an entire year. Thousands of dollars in labor, materials, emergency cleanups, holiday maintenance. I had never sent an invoice because I'd believed helping them was part of being a son. Not anymore. I drafted a short email, professional and cold. Effective immediately. All services to your property are terminated. Outstanding balance is due within 14 business days. Further communication will be handled through legal channels. No anger, no explanation, no softness, just business. The third shift was quieter but heavier. I started saying no. When Brenda called that afternoon, her tone sugary. Rehearsed, I didn't answer. When Walter texted asking if I could swing by to fix a leak in their guest bathroom, I replied, unavailable. Please contact a licensed contractor. He read it instantly. He didn't reply. Every boundary I set felt like lifting a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. Leonard noticed the change too. One evening, I found him awake, more lucid than usual. He watched me tidy the workshop, then said quietly, "You don't have to save everyone, kid." "I know," I whispered. He nodded toward the door. "Good. Start by saving yourself." The fourth shift came from the only person who had always stood in my corner, my Aunt Irene, Leonard's sister. She stopped by unannounced with soup and a stack of mail. When I showed her the legal documents, she put a hand on my shoulder. "He trusted you," she said gently. "We all did. You're the one who stayed." Her support, the only elder who ever treated me like family, felt like stepping onto solid ground after years of sinking sand. With her help, I began organizing Leonard's estate records, updating accounts, and preparing for the future with a calm clarity I hadn't felt before. And then came the final shift. A quiet revenge, carried by a single email. Walter sent me a message that evening, long and defensive, accusing me of being ungrateful and dramatic. He ended it with, "We need to talk about Dad's assets and future decisions. It's a family matter." I replied with one sentence. "All decisions regarding Leonard's care and estate fall under my legal authority." Attached was the signed power of attorney. I imagined him reading it, his face tightening, his certainty cracking, the narrative he'd built collapsing in on itself. No yelling, no confrontation, no spectacle, just truth. My kind of revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a steady reclaiming of what was mine to carry and what never should have been. By the end of that week, something inside me had transformed. I wasn't the forgotten son anymore. I wasn't the stand-in, the extra pair of hands, the silent background character. I was the one with the authority, the one with the records, the one with the truth. The power had shifted, quietly and irrevocably. And they didn't even realize the real storm was still ahead. The confrontation didn't happen in a private room or over a tense dinner. It happened in the one place Brenda and Walter never expected to lose control: a polished downtown conference center. rented for an urgent family mediation. They chose the venue because it looked expensive, because the floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the skyline, and because presentation had always mattered more to them than substance. I walked in wearing the same work jacket and boots I'd worn the day Leonard made me executor. I wasn't trying to provoke anything. I just refused to costume myself for their comfort. Their attorney, Gregory Hale, a man known for his charm and his ruthless efficiency, was already seated. Brenda and Walter sat beside him, each with a curated expression. Brenda's was soft, wounded. Walter's was stern, disappointed. Michelle hovered behind them, phone tucked halfway into her sleeve, undoubtedly ready to capture content if things went in their favor. The mediator introduced herself, but no one listened. Brenda jumped in first. "Brian," she said with a trembling voice, "we're worried about you." This sudden power grab has created unnecessary tension. We all love Leonard. We all want what's best for him. I took a seat, slow and steady. "You mean you want what's best for you?" Walter leaned forward, careful. I glanced at Gregory Hale, who offered a polished smile. "Brian, this is simply about ensuring fairness. Your parents are concerned about how isolated Leonard has become since you took over his care." There it was. The story they'd been rehearsing. Isolation, manipulation, neglect. Michelle chimed in. "You never let us visit. You guard him like some." "I guard him," I said quietly. The room shifted. The mediator raised a hand. "Let's approach this calmly." But Brenda wasn't done. "We've seen the documents," she said, voice rising. "You somehow got him to sign everything over to you. It's not normal. It's not healthy. Leonard wasn't in his right mind." "He trusted me," I said, "because I showed up." Gregory interjected smoothly. "Brian, if you refuse to discuss reallocating Leonard's estate, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action. Elder influence claims, evidence of undue control, isolation, intentional exclusion of immediate family." The words hung in the air like a trap wired to snap shut. I opened my bag and placed Leonard's notebooks, 5 of them, on the table. Their leather covers were worn, the corners softened from years of use. "These aren't just records," I said. "They're 5 years of his life. Every meal, every appointment, every good day, every bad day, every time I called, texted, or left you a voicemail asking for help." Walter scoffed. "Journals. You think that's proof? You think anyone believes?" I slid a printed stack across the table. Phone records. Every unanswered call. Every unread message. Every time they vanished when Leonard needed something. Gregory's smile tightened. Brenda pushed the papers away. "This is ridiculous. Anyone can fabricate." Before she finished, the conference room door opened. A woman stepped inside, poised, composed, wearing a navy suit with understated confidence. "This mediation includes legal review," she said. "I'm here to provide mine." It was attorney Janet Fowler, known for exposing financial abuse cases and deeply respected in senior law circles. Irene had contacted her quietly, and she'd agreed to attend once she reviewed the documents I provided. Brenda blinked. "Who are you?" "Someone who understands the difference," Fowler said calmly, "between devotion and performance." She sat beside me, opening her folder. "Let's start with the power of attorney," she said. It wasn't coerced. It was executed with a third-party witness. The signatures match. The timestamp matches. Leonard designated Brian because Brian was the only one present in his life. Walter slammed a hand on the table. "We were busy. We have jobs, lives. We can't just drop everything." "Brian did," Fowler said. "For years." Gregory tried to recover. "Even so, the family deserves equitable distribution." "No," Fowler replied. "They deserve what Leonard intended. And Leonard intended his estate to go to the person who ensured his safety, dignity, and comfort, not the people who visited only when it was convenient for social media." Michelle bristled. "You don't know us." Fowler slid a tablet across the table. On its screen was a curated montage of Michelle's posts, all designed to appear like she was a devoted granddaughter. Hashtags. Posing. Filtered tears. Your digital footprint contradicts your statements. Fowler said. You tagged brands in the same videos you claimed were family moments. That is not devotion. That is marketing. The silence that followed wasn't just still, it was suffocating. Brenda's tone sharpened. So what, you're siding with him? You're enabling his narrative. Fowler folded her hands. I'm siding with facts. The mediator leaned forward cautiously. Perhaps we can redirect this to solutions. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, what outcome are you seeking? Walter answered instantly. Control of the estate. Leonard would have never left everything to he. Waved a dismissive hand toward me. A landscaper. It wasn't the insult that hit me. It was the entitlement. I stood slowly. If Leonard's assets matter to you more than Leonard did, that's your burden to carry, not mine. Fowler placed one final document on the table. A signed statement from Irene. A witness account of years of neglect by Brenda and Walter. A record of the times Leonard told her he didn't want them handling anything. Gregory swallowed hard. He knew they were cornered. Brenda's face crumpled not in grief, but in humiliation. Walter stared at the window. Jaw clenched. Michelle muttered, "This is insane. We're his real family." I looked at them, really looked, and felt nothing but clarity. I gave you chances. I said quietly. I asked for help. I asked you to show up. You didn't. So I did. The mediator reached a conclusion. Based on the evidence, authority remains with Brian Miller. Any further challenge will likely result in court sanctions. They had lost. Not because I fought harder, but because the truth stood on its own. I collected the notebooks, the records, the documents. As I walked toward the exit, Brenda called after me, voice shaking. "Brian, if you leave now, that's it." I paused at the door. This was it a long time ago. Then I left. No dramatic music. No slamming doors. Just the quiet steps of someone finally done carrying what was never his to hold. The skyline outside felt different. Not brighter. Not softer. Just honest. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. In the weeks after the mediation, life didn't transform overnight. There was no triumphant soundtrack. No sudden sense of freedom rushing through my veins. The world looked the same streets. Same workshop. Same cup of morning coffee, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, the silence around me wasn't heavy. It wasn't a punishment. It was a choice. Brenda and Walter went quiet. Completely quiet. No texts demanding explanations. No guilt-soaked voicemails. No offers to talk things through. They retreated into their world of curated appearances. And for once, their absence didn't sting. It simply made sense. Michelle posted a vague 2-minute video about family stress and protecting your peace, which was her way of saying she'd lost the narrative and was pivoting to save face. The real consequences landed where they belonged. Bills they had ignored for years were suddenly theirs again. Contractors called them instead of me. The landscaping they'd taken for granted began to overgrow. They had to rehire help, redo budgets, and face the reality of the life they'd been pretending they could afford. Their problems were finally returning to their rightful owners. Meanwhile, Leonard's world became calmer. I adjusted his routines, rearranged the workshop living space so it felt more grounded, and made sure every day had something comforting woven into it: warm light, soft music, and familiar smells of cedar or fresh bread. Even on his worst days, he was never alone, never confused about why I was there. One evening, while I was brushing sawdust off his blanket, he looked at me with rare clarity. "You're doing good, kid," he murmured. It didn't matter that he didn't remember half the story. He remembered the part that counted. He passed quietly one morning, sunlight spilling across the floorboards. No fear, no pain, just a man finishing a long life in the place he loved most. I held his hand until the warmth faded. I thought I'd fall apart. But instead, I felt steady. His absence hurt. Yes, but it didn't hollow me out. He had never left me empty. He'd left me shaped. After the funeral, small, simple, exactly what he wanted. I found myself thinking about the years I spent fighting to be seen by the wrong people, and how many others were living the same story. Kids burdened by parents who cared more about image than connection. Elderly people quietly fading in the corners of their own families. People like me, convinced invisibility was normal. So I started talking. Not on a stage. Not behind a microphone, just one person at a time. A neighbor who couldn't get her sons to visit. A coworker who was drowning from caring for his mother alone. A single dad terrified his daughter thought he wasn't enough. I shared pieces of my experience. Just enough to help them breathe easier. Little by little, it grew. Families began opening their eyes sooner. People stopped apologizing for choosing boundaries. Some took their elders out of facilities and brought them home with better support systems, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. Others learned how to visit more intentionally, not just for holidays or social media posts. I even got invited to speak at a community center. Just a small workshop on caregiving basics and emotional burnout. I walked in expecting 10 people, 30 showed up. The most unexpected thing happened a month later. A teen girl named Maya, quiet, soft-spoken, always looking like she was trying not to take up space, showed up at the workshop, asking if I could teach her how to sand wood. She said the shop felt safe. Safe was all I needed to hear. Now she comes every week. We talk about nothing and everything: school stress, her dreams, the pressure she feels at home. I see pieces of myself in her, and I make sure she hears what I once needed: you're not invisible here. Helping others didn't erase the past. It transformed it. The hurt didn't vanish. It became useful. Every bruise, every lonely night, every boundary I learned too late now, they meant something. I'm not Leonard's lost grandson anymore. I'm the man he trusted. The man I chose to become. And somehow, that feels like the beginning of something far bigger than the ending that brought me here. If this story resonated with you, let's share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your experiences. And if you've ever carried the weight of family alone, consider sharing this with someone who might need it. Your voice could help someone feel seen. This content is created by the Kitchen Tables team for entertainment purposes only. Names, characters, and events are fictional and not intended to guide real-life decisions.